government officials who knew about the interrogation program, but who were sworn to secrecy as long as the program was still officially classified, they're now free to talk about it. And because of that, we have new major news to report. In May 2005, Condoleezza Rice's counselor at the State Department, Philip Zelikow, gained access to the memos we have now all seen since they were published last week. Mr. Zelikow is a lawyer. He says he believed at the time that the memos were wrong. He believed that they presented a distorted view of the law, and he put his concerns in writing. That fact is really important. In the big picture here, what was going on in the Bush administration is that they were providing supposedly authoritative legal advice, which said that things like chaining people to the ceiling and waterboarding them and stress positions and sleep deprivation and locking people inside tiny boxes, according to their supposedly authoritative legal analysis, those heretofore secret legal memos we've all now read, they said that those techniques were okay according to U.S. law. We are now learning that competing advice was distributed inside the Bush administration that said, no, that analysis was wrong. According to Philip Zelikow, writing at the website of Foreign Policy magazine today, quote, "My colleagues were entitled to ignore my views. They did more than that. The White House attempted to collect and destroy all copies of my memo." Joining us now is Philip Zelikow, former counselor at the State Department, a trusted advisor and deputy to Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. He also served as executive director of the 9/11 Commission, and he's now a contributor to Foreign Policy magazine. Mr. Zelikow, thank you so much for taking time to join us tonight.
Glad to be here.
First of all, let me give you the opportunity to correct me if I have mischaracterized anything. Is what I have said about your involvement in this issue thus far, have I accurately characterized it?
Yes.
Okay. So you first saw these Office of Legal Counsel memos in 2005. What was your reaction to the legal reasoning in those memos?
Many years earlier, when I had been a law student and had been a practicing lawyer, I had worked actually on issues of treatment of prisoners and that whole body of constitutional law. So when I saw the memoranda, I was struck by the fact that even aside from the policy problems, the legal reasoning seemed deeply unsound to me, and I wasn't sure that the President and his advisors understood just how potentially questionable and unreasonable many lawyers and judges would find this reasoning. And so I thought it was important to just say, hey, there's another view here of this law, and a lot of people would regard the views in these memos as, to say the least, outliers.
So when you say that judges might see it, we suggest judges are one of the audiences that might not be persuaded by the reasoning in these memos. Were you thinking ahead to the purpose for which these memos were drafted, which is essentially, I mean, it's hard for those of us outside of government to sometimes understand what the purpose of an OLC memo is, but essentially to provide a defense in case people were accused of acting illegally in ways that were described in those memos. Is that what you were thinking of?
Yeah, Rachel, perhaps just a little bit of background to put this in context for your viewers. America has fought a number of wars in our history, including against unconventional enemies. This was an interrogation program, however, for which there is no precedent in the history of the United States. We've never done a program like this before. So where the administration is moving into uncharted waters, they're clearly doing things that folks know are legally questionable. That's why these opinions were requested, because there were questions about whether this sort of conduct was lawful, since it was unprecedented. So here the Justice Department is coming down and saying, look, this is a murky area of the law, but here's what we think you're allowed to do. Now, whether it's a good idea to do it is another question. Whether it's moral is another question. The question before them was, is it lawful to do this? And the Justice Department has the job of giving authoritative guidance for the executive branch on how the U.S. law should be interpreted in the conduct of our actions.
And the memo that you wrote, the document that you wrote that you've described today at the website of Foreign Policy magazine, essentially said that they got it wrong when they described what you are allowed to do under U.S. law, that their reasoning was flawed. It didn't take account of the relevant case law, for example, that they should have called on to prove their point. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate. Now, look, I'm just one point of view. I looked at their point of view, and it didn't strike me as a mainstream or reasonable way of construing the relevant standards of treatment, of the definition of terms like cruel, inhuman, or degrading. They were using an interpretation of how to comply with that standard that I didn't think any judges or lawyers outside of the administration would find plausible, and I wasn't sure other folks realized just how implausible it was. So now, of course, I'm just offering my opinion. Now, I was there as part of a team representing the State Department, acting as an agent of Secretary Rice, who had grave concerns about all of this. But others in the administration are perfectly entitled to say, no, we looked at the law, and we have the Justice Department. They know a lot more about this than you do. But look, they were entitled to hear an alternative point of view and figure out whether or not they wanted to reevaluate their opinion.
Rather than just disagreeing with you or saying that they thought that you were wrong and the Office of Legal Counsel memos that you were rebutting were correct, why do you think they tried to destroy every copy of the memo that they knew existed? And how did you find out that they did try to destroy copies of the memo?
Well, I found out because I was told. I mean, we're trying to collect these and destroy them, and you have a copy, don't you? But I know that copies were obtained in my building, and as I mentioned, Secretary Rice understood what I was doing on her behalf. I was her agent in these matters, and so I think copies still exist. Why would they destroy them? That's a question they'll have to answer. Obviously, if you want to eliminate records because you don't want people to be able to find them.